They're coming. We need to move.
What? I'm not finished.
No time. Grab it and let's go.
The parking lot of Top Shot Indoor Range was empty at 7 in the morning, except for one vehicle. A dark green pickup truck, the kind that had seen too many winters and did not apologize for any of them, sat alone near the far end of the lot. No bumper stickers, no decorations, just a truck that did what it was supposed to do and nothing more. The door opened at 7:14 a.m. She stepped out slowly. Not the slowness of age or hesitation, but the deliberate, measured slowness of someone who had learned a long time ago that the space between one step and the next could matter. Her right foot found the frozen asphalt a half beat after her left, a slight catch in the stride. Not a limp exactly, something more like a memory the body could not quite shake. Ash Mercer was 25 years old. She wore a gray hoodie faded at the cuffs, dark jeans, work boots that had been resoled twice. Her hair was pulled back without effort or ceremony. There was nothing about her appearance that asked for anything from anyone. No tactical vest, no branded apparel, no patches announcing where she had been or what she had done. Just a woman in the cold morning air reaching into the back seat of her truck with both hands lifting out a long rifle case that was older than half the people who would soon be inside that building. The case was olive green canvas worn soft with years of handling. The zipper had been replaced once. The handle had been rewrapped with black electrical tape. She carried it at her side, not slung over her shoulder, not dragged behind her. Carried it the way you carry something that belongs with you. She walked toward the entrance. The cold bit at her face. Colorado Springs in January had a specific kind of cold, a dry, flat, relentless cold that came down from the mountains and found every gap in your clothing with the patient efficiency of something that had been doing this for a very long time. Her breath came out in small, white clouds and disappeared. She did not pull her collar up. She did not quicken her pace. She pushed through the door. Inside, the range smelled the way it always smelled. Gun oil and recirculated air and the faint metallic ghost of powder that never fully left, no matter how many times they filtered it. The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, bright and indifferent. The reception desk was to the left. Glass cases along the walls held accessories, cleaning kits, ear protection in a dozen colors, targets in a dozen shapes. The woman behind the desk was new. Young, maybe 19, with a top-shot polo that was one size too large. She looked up when Ash came in and gave the practiced smile of someone who had been told to smile at customers. Ash placed her membership card on the counter without being asked. The girl scanned it, glanced at the screen, handed it back. Lane preference, last one, Sarano. The girl typed something. That's lane 14, all the way to the end. Ash picked up her card. I know where it is. She had been coming here every Tuesday morning for 3 months, always lane 14. Always the first customer through the door. Always gone before the Tuesday crowd arrived. That was the arrangement she had made with herself, and she kept it the way she kept most things. Quietly, consistently, without requiring anyone else to understand why. She walked through the inner door into the range itself. It was a long, rectangular room with low ceilings and high walls. 14 shooting lanes ran parallel from the entrance to the far concrete backstop, each one separated by low partitions. The lanes were numbered in reverse, with lane 1 on the left and lane 14 at the far right end of the room. A thick rubber curtain hung across the entire width of the back wall floor to ceiling, designed to absorb stray rounds. Behind that curtain was the concrete itself. At 7 in the morning, the place was quiet. 2 men in lane 3 were setting up unpacking gear with the systematic enthusiasm of people who had come here for fun. A few lanes down, a man in his early 50s sat at lane 7 alone, running a cleaning rod through the barrel of a bolt-action rifle with the patient, unhurried movement of someone who had done it so many times it had become a form of quiet thinking. He had the build of a man who had once been required to be very strong and had simply stayed that way out of habit. His hair was silver at the temples. His hands were wide and steady. He did not look up when Ash walked past. She reached lane 14, set the rifle case on the bench, unzipped it. The rifle inside was a Springfield M21. The walnut stock had been worn dark and smooth over decades of handling, buffed by oil and friction, until it had the deep, quiet color of old wood that had been asked a great deal of and had given it. The barrel was clean. The optics were simple, older, without the digital enhancements and illuminated reticles that most shooters in this building considered standard. It was a weapon that predated most of the technology in this room by 20 years. And on the right side of the stock, fitted flush into the wood with the precision of a craftsman, was a small brass plate. It was no larger than a postage stamp. The edges had been hand-filed smooth. The surface was engraved in a thin, careful hand, the kind of engraving done with patience rather than machinery. A set of coordinates, latitude and longitude precise to 6 decimal places, and below them a date, August 14th, 2021. Ash ran the pad of her thumb across it once. The metal was cold from the night in the truck. She let it warm for a moment under her touch, then took her hand away and began her pre-range routine. She checked the action, checked the bore, checked the seating of the optic, loaded a single magazine and seated it with a firm practice push. She pulled on her ear protection, simple foam inserts, nothing electronic, nothing that amplified ambient sound or fed her data about her environment. She did not need those things. She had never needed those things. She was not thinking about anything in particular. That was the point. The medical separation had come in the spring of 2023. Her right leg, which had taken a fragment of steel near the fibula during a situation that would never appear in any news report, had been assessed and reassessed by 4 different military physicians over 8 months. The fragment was still there, would stay there. The leg worked. It would probably always work. But the combination of chronic pain management, limited operational mobility, and the medical board's unanimous conclusion had produced a single document that she received on a Tuesday morning in March and read once and folded and put in her truck's glove compartment where it still was. Medically separated from service. Effective immediately. She had been 24 years old. The Tuesday morning sessions at Top Shot were not therapy. She had made that clear to herself. They were maintenance. The way some men ran 5 miles every morning, not because they were training for something, but because the body knew how to do it, and stopping felt like a kind of forgetting. She came here because the rifle knew her, and she knew it, and the relationship between shooter and weapon was one of the few relationships in her life that did not require explanation. She raised the rifle, settled her breathing, found the target downrange. The paper silhouette hung at 50 yards, suspended by a thin horizontal wire at the top and a metal clamp at the base of the frame. Standard issue. Black outline of a human torso and head against white paper. She had shot at hundreds of these, thousands maybe across a career that had taken her places where the targets were not paper. She exhaled half a breath, let it settle, squeezed the trigger. The shot broke clean. The sound in lane 14 was a sharp crack followed by the brief hissing echo that bounced off the back concrete and the sidewalls and died. The paper target swayed slightly on its wire. Ash worked the action, reacquired, fired again, then again. By the 5th shot, the 2 men in lane 3 had noticed. They were looking down the range toward lane 14 with the sideways attention of people who do not want to be caught staring, but cannot help it. They could not see anything wrong exactly. They could just see that the paper target at the end of lane 14 was entirely, completely, remarkably clean. Not a single hole in it. Ash continued firing. She was not rushing, she was not adjusting. Her posture did not change between shots. Her grip did not tighten. She breathed with the same slow regularity of someone at rest, and after each shot, she worked the action with the same unhurried motion and reacquired and fired again. Each shot sounded exactly like the last. Each shot produced the same result. The target hung there unmarked, pristine, as though she had not fired at all. By the time the door from the lobby swung open again, and the next wave of Tuesday morning regulars began to file in, Ash had fired 8 rounds. The target was still perfect. The man who came in loudest was Brandon Fitch. He was 32, broad-shouldered, with the kind of confident, physical ease that came from never having doubted himself in any way that left a mark. He wore a branded tactical jacket and flat dark earth, matching pants and boots that had been chosen for their appearance rather than their use. Behind him, 2 friends carried cases and extra gear. Brandon himself carried a camera on a shoulder rig, and he was already talking before he was fully through the door, his voice pitched at the volume of someone accustomed to being listened to. "All right, guys, we are live," he said, angling the camera up toward his own face and then swinging it across the room. "Tuesday at Top Shot, let's see what we got going on today." His channel had 800,000 subscribers. He posted 3 videos a week, sometimes more. His content was built on a combination of genuine technical knowledge and the performance of casual confidence, and his audience had grown because he was in fact a decent shot and an entertaining presence. He knew the difference between a good take and a great take, and he was always looking for the latter. He swept the camera across the range. Lane 3, lane 7, the empty lanes in the middle. Then lane 14. He paused. The camera settled on the paper target hanging at 50 yards unmarked after 8 shots, and on the woman standing at the bench behind it already loading her next round with the calm indifference of someone who had not noticed that the room was watching. Brandon lowered the camera slightly, tilted his head. Then he raised the camera again, aimed it down the range, and zoomed in on the target. 8 shots, no hits. On his phone, propped in a chest mount, the live comment feed was already running. He smiled, not meanly, just the smile of someone who had spotted something his audience would find interesting. "Okay," he said quietly to the camera, and to the room, and to nobody in particular. "We might have something here." He set up in lane 6 with the unhurried efficiency of long practice, never fully turning away from lane 14. In lane 7, the man with the silver hair and the wide, steady hands had finished cleaning his rifle and had begun to load. His name was Colt Radner. He had retired from the Army 3 years ago after 22 years of service, the last 12 with 75th Ranger Regiment. He now ran a private firearms instruction business out of a small office in Colorado Springs, serving primarily veterans and law enforcement. He charged less than the market rate and did not advertise. Most of his clients found him by word of mouth, the way serious people always found serious instructors. He was not here today to instruct. He was here because Tuesday mornings before the crowd arrived were the only time he could shoot for himself without the obligation of commentary or correction. He had heard Ash's shots before he saw her. The rhythm had caught his attention, not the sound of the individual shots, which was unremarkable, but the rhythm between them. Consistent in a way that even excellent shooters were not usually consistent. The interval between shots was not the interval of a shooter pacing herself. It was the interval of a shooter who did not need to pace herself because she was operating below her actual capacity. He had looked down the range toward lane 14. He had seen the paper target. He had gone very still. Then he had seen something else. The thin metal wire at the top of the target frame was trembling, not swaying, not moving from air current or the general vibration of the range, trembling at a specific localized point approximately 1/3 of the way from the left clamp. The kind of trembling produced by a concentrated repeated impact. The kind of trembling that only happened when something struck the same point more than once. The paper target hung below the wire unmarked. Colt set down the rifle he had been loading. He did this slowly, the way a man moves when his mind is somewhere else entirely, when the body is still handling the present while the mind is already 3 steps ahead, trying to decide if what it is seeing is possible. He had seen something like this once before, or not exactly seen it. He had watched a video classified shown during a joint operations briefing in 2022, a video that documented a confirmed engagement in which a shooter had demonstrated a pattern of precision that the range analyst had declined to characterize using standard terminology because standard terminology did not accommodate it. The shooter's name had been redacted. The engagement coordinates had been redacted. The video had lasted 4 minutes and 11 seconds, and Colt had thought about it on and off for the 2 years since. The wire on the target frame in lane 14 trembled again after the 9th shot. He looked at the target, clean white paper, not a mark on it. He looked at the wire. He looked at Ash Mercer standing at the bench with her rifle loading her 10th round with the same unhurried, repetitive calm she had shown for every round before it. Something moved through Colt Radner in that moment. Not surprise exactly. He was too old and had seen too much for pure surprise. It was the feeling of a very large piece falling into place, the moment when a thing you had only half believed becomes entirely real. She was not missing. She had never been missing. He picked up his phone. The man who arrived from the equipment room at the back of the range was Derek Holt, range safety officer, for the Tuesday and Wednesday morning shifts. He was 28, precise in his movements, and certain in the specific way of someone who has passed every certification required of him and several that were not. He had applied for the RSO position 18 months ago because it offered sanctioned authority in an environment where he felt most at home, and the range owner, a man named Prescott, who valued decisive people, had given it to him. Holt crossed the floor toward lane 14 with the measured, purposeful walk of a man going to handle a situation. He had seen the target. He had seen the shot count. He had formed a conclusion, and he wore the conclusion on his face the way a doctor wears a diagnosis, already knowing what he is going to say before he has heard everything. Ash was loading her 10th round when he arrived at the partition beside her lane. He waited until she had finished, then leaned one hand on the partition and spoke with the careful courtesy of a man who had been trained to de-escalate. "Ma'am, checking in on your lane here." Ash looked at him. Her expression did not change. She said nothing. Holt glanced at the target, then back at her. "I've been watching your lane for a few minutes. I count 8 shots and I'm not seeing any contact with your target." He kept his voice light, professional. "Do you want to check your zero? We have a zeroing target if that would help." "I'm hitting it," Ash said. Holt blinked, a half pause, the pause of someone recalibrating. He looked at the target again, then at her. Ma'am, the target is clean. I know. In lane 6, Brandon had the camera aimed down toward lane 14. His comment feed was active and moving fast, and viewers were sending in reactions with the reflexive speed of people whose first instinct is to perform their amusement for each other. I'm going to have to ask what's going on, Holt said. His tone had shifted slightly. Still polite, but with an edge under it, now the edge of someone who is not being understood and considers that the other person's failing. If you're having difficulty acquiring the target at 50 yards, that's not a problem, we can work with that. We have a 25-yard pistol lane. I'm not having difficulty, Ash said. Then where are your rounds going? She looked at him for one moment with pale eyes that held something harder and quieter than either patience or challenge. Where I'm putting them, she said. Holt straightened. He took a breath. He looked at the target one more time, and then he made the decision that some people make when they have been given information they cannot fit into the model they have already built. He decided the information was wrong. I need to see your range permit and your ID, he said, his voice now flat of its earlier pleasantness. And I'm going to need to inspect that weapon. Ash said nothing. She produced her identification and her membership card from her jacket pocket and placed them on the bench. She lifted the rifle and offered it stock first, then stepped back. Holt took it. He was surprised by the weight of it, the dense, solid weight of older metal and genuine wood, nothing like the engineered lightness of the modern polymer rifles he handled every day. He turned it over, examining the barrel, the action, the sighting system, looking for a malfunction, a damaged crown, a loose optic, something to explain what he had seen. His fingers moved along the underside of the stock. They found the brass plate. It was small and smooth and cold, and when his fingertips touched it, something passed through him that he could not name and would not have described to anyone if asked. It lasted less than a second. It was the sensation of heat, tremendous and flat, and within the heat, a quality of silence so complete it could only mean something was about to break it, and the ghost of an image that was gone before he could bring it into focus. He shook his head, looked at the brass plate. Coordinates and a date, meaningless to him. He moved on. There is nothing wrong with this weapon, he said, setting it back on the bench with the finality of someone who has not found what he was looking for and considers that someone else's problem. Which means your rounds are going somewhere. Since they're not hitting your target, I need to know where. He reached a decision. Your lane is cleared. I'm going to ask you to step back from the bench. Your membership is under review pending a full incident report. Around the room, other shooters had drifted from their lanes. There were 8 or 9 people now standing at the informal boundary behind the shooting stalls, watching with the mixed expression of people who are entertained by a situation they do not fully understand. Brandon had repositioned himself to capture both Ash and the crowd in a single wide angle. His comment feed had climbed past 40,000 concurrent viewers. Ash stepped back from the bench. She did not argue. She did not raise her voice. She looked at Derek Holt with those pale and hurried eyes, and she waited. Colt Radner was in the hallway near the equipment room, speaking quietly and quickly into his phone. Name is Ash Mercer, he said. 25, maybe 26. Rifle is an M21 walnut stock, custom work, small brass plate, inlaid on the right side of the stock. Coordinates and a date. He gave the date, August 14th, 2021. I need you to run the name. The voice on the other end said something short and skeptical. I understand that, Colt said. I wouldn't be calling if I wasn't certain. Just run it. He waited. Through the thin wall, he could hear the range, the movement of people, the occasional crack of a shot from another lane, and underneath it all the tone of Derek Holt's voice. Not the words, just the register of it, the register of a man who had decided how something was going to end and was proceeding accordingly. The voice came back, and when it did, it was different. The person speaking was not the same person they had been 30 seconds earlier. Say that again, Colt said. The voice said it again. Colt closed his eyes for a single moment. When he opened them, his expression was the expression of a man who has received a confirmation he had hoped was coming and had not been entirely sure he deserved to receive. Don't let anyone touch her rifle, he said, and call Cross. Tell him where she is. He hung up. He stood in the hallway for 3 seconds. Then he pushed back through the door into the range. Holt was now standing beside the rifle on the bench, writing on an incident form attached to a clipboard. His pen moved with the focused energy of someone who believes that documentation is a form of power, which in certain contexts it is. He wrote without looking up as Colt crossed the floor toward lane 7. Colt did not pick up his own rifle. He stood at the bench with both hands flat on the surface and looked down the range at the brass plate on Ash's M21, and he thought about the coordinates engraved there and what was at those coordinates and what the voice on the phone had told him. He had been in Ramadi. He had been in the Korangal Valley. He had come home with his body intact and with things inside it that were not intact, the invisible cargo that soldiers carry across every border when they return the weight of what you know now that you did not know before. He had met men who wore their service loudly and men who wore it not at all. He had met in 22 years perhaps 3 or 4 people who had done things so far outside the ordinary range of human experience that the things themselves had become a kind of silence too large and too specific to exist in ordinary conversation. He had watched a 4-minute video in a classified briefing in 2022. He had thought about it off and on for 2 years. He had never expected to find the person from that video standing in lane 14 of a civilian shooting range on a Tuesday morning in January. He opened his phone and typed the coordinates from the brass plate into a mapping application. The pin dropped on eastern Afghanistan, Kandahar province, a district that appeared on satellite imagery as flat-roof structures and pale compressed earth, the remnants of a military installation that had been quietly decommissioned during the withdrawal and no longer existed in any public record. He typed a second search. The date, August 14th, 2021, combined with the coordinates and a set of terms that a civilian would not have known to put together. Nothing came back. No news coverage, no official statements, no wire service reports. The day existed in the public record the way many days existed during that period as a Tuesday in August when the country had been watching other things and this particular thing had happened in a place that the country was not watching. Colt put his phone away. He walked to lane 14. Holt looked up from his clipboard when Colt stopped at the partition, and his expression was the expression of someone whose process is being interrupted. "Sir, I need you to stay clear of this lane while I complete the incident report." "I heard you," Colt said. He did not look at Holt. He was looking at Ash, who was standing at the back of her lane with her arms at her sides and her eyes on the brass plate. "I want to ask you 3 questions. For you, not her." Holt hesitated. Something in Colt's voice had reached him at a level below the conscious decision to be annoyed by it. "Go ahead. In the last 18 months, how many members have you removed from this range for proficiency concerns?" Holt's jaw tightened. "That's internal information." 3, Colt said. "I've spoken to 2 of them. One was a retired man who had been shooting here for 9 years without a single incident. One was a woman in her 60s with a competitive shooting record going back 2 decades. The third I haven't confirmed yet." He paused. "Were they a problem for the range or a problem for you?" Holt set the clipboard down. "My decisions on this range are based on safety assessments, not—" "I'm not making an accusation," Colt said, and his voice carried no anger. It carried something colder and more patient than anger. "I'm noting a pattern. That's different." He looked at the clipboard. "Finish your form. I'm going to make one more phone call." He returned to lane 7, took out his phone and dialed a number he had been given in a different context for different reasons that he had never expected to use for something like this. The voice that answered was a man in his late 50s with the unhurried precision of someone who had spent decades saying important things in situations where imprecision had consequences. "Radner," the voice said. "Colonel Cross," Colt said. "Where are you right now?" A brief pause. "My office." "What is it?" "I need about 90 seconds. Then I need you to do something." "Go," Colt told him. He kept it brief and factual, the way you keep things brief and factual when you are reporting to a senior officer and want to be believed without arguing your credibility. He gave the name. He gave the location. He described the rifle, the stock, the brass plate, and what was on it. At the end, he said, "The coordinates are from the 14th, August 14th. On the other end of the line, Colonel Raymond Cross said nothing for 4 seconds. Colt counted them. "The rifle is sitting on a bench," Colt said. "Someone else's hands have already been on that plate." Cross said quietly, "Is she all right?" "She's standing. She hasn't said much. They're in the process of removing her from the premises." "Do not let that happen." "No, sir. I'll be there in 20 minutes. The line went dead. Colt set his phone down and looked at the room. The small crowd behind the lanes. Brandon Fitch in lane 6 with his camera running and his eyes moving between the footage and his comment feed. Derek Holt completing his incident form with the focused energy of someone building a case. Ash standing at the back of lane 14, not performing patience, simply possessing it, the stillness of someone who has been in situations that required waiting and has developed through that experience, a relationship with waiting that most people do not understand. Holt tore the top copy from the clipboard and placed it on the bench beside the rifle. "Ma'am," he said, "I'm placing at this range in a formal suspension of your membership effective today, pending review by the range director. I need you to step away from your equipment." That's my rifle, Ash said. It will be returned to you after the review process is complete. She said it again, not louder, not harder. The same two words, the same tone, but with something in the repetition that was less a protest than a statement of simple fact. The way you state something you expect will be eventually accepted regardless of how long the accepting takes. Holt picked up the rifle. He moved it to the equipment shelf behind the bench and placed it there with the barrel pointing at the back wall, the brass plate facing outward. Then he turned back to Ash with the expression of a man who has completed an unpleasant task he considers necessary. In lane 6, Brandon Fitch had gone quiet. He had been quiet for several minutes. His camera was still running, the comment feed still active, but he had stopped narrating. Something had shifted in the way he was watching lane 14. A shift from the angle of a content creator identifying material to the angle of a person actually looking at what was in front of him. He had noticed a few minutes earlier something he had not noticed before. The wire. The trembling of the wire after each of Ash's shots. He had a good eye for detail, trained by years of examining footage frame by frame, and once he saw it, he could not unsee it. He had zoomed in on the wire during Ash's last 2 shots, and what he saw in the footage made him lower the camera to his side. He thought about 8 shots. He thought about 50 yards. He thought about a wire that was approximately 1/8 of an inch in diameter. He thought about the same point on that wire repeatedly. He turned the camera off. It was the first time he had ended a live session early in 4 months. He sat in lane 6 and opened his phone and started looking things up the way a person looks things up when they suddenly need more information than they have and feel the specific discomfort of realizing they have been performing certainty without its foundation. Holt had followed Ash to the lobby where Prescott, the range owner, had come down from his upstairs office in response to a text. Prescott was a man in his early 60s, thick through the shoulders with the direct, capable manner of someone who had built something with his hands and was used to problems that had practical solutions. He listened to Holt's summary with divided attention, simultaneously understanding what was being told to him and calculating what it meant for his business. Then he turned to Ash. "Can you help me understand what's happening here?" Ash considered this for a moment. The quality of the silence before she spoke was the silence of someone choosing not the words which she already had, but the number of them, because too many would be as wrong as too few. "I've been a member here for 3 months," she said. "I come Tuesday mornings. I shoot lane 14. I haven't had an incident." She paused. "Your RSO believes my rounds aren't landing on the target." He's right. They're not landing on the target because I'm not shooting at the target. Prescott's eyebrows moved. "What are you shooting at?" "The wire at the top of the target frame," Ash said. "The same point on the wire, repeatedly." The girl at the reception desk had stopped pretending to work. Holt opened his mouth and then stopped because the sentence he was about to say was that what she was describing was not possible. And between beginning that sentence and completing it, the part of his mind responsible for arithmetic had run a brief calculation and returned a result he could not immediately dismiss. 50 yards, a wire 1/8 of an inch in diameter. The same point, repeatedly. He said nothing. "Can you prove that?" Prescott said. "Open the bullet trap," Ash said. She said it the way you say something you have known for 40 minutes would eventually need to be said, with the measured calm of someone delivering information to people who do not yet share it, but will. The lobby door opened. Colt Radner came through it. He looked at Ash once briefly with the look of a man who has made a phone call and is now waiting for the consequences of it to arrive. Then he looked at Prescott. "The bullet trap," he said calmly. "You'll want to open it before anyone else gets here." Prescott looked at him, looked at Ash. Something in the phrase "anyone else" produced a change in his attention. "Before anyone else," he repeated. "Yes," Colt said. "Soon." Prescott turned to Holt. "Get me the access key." Holt went for the key. He was experiencing the specific discomfort of a man whose authority is being quietly redirected not by louder authority, but by a quality of calm he could not match and could not argue with, and he was deciding whether to resist or adapt. He adapted. He went for the key. Ash stood near the lobby door and felt the cold coming under it from outside. Through the glass panel, she could see her truck in the parking lot, the flat gray sky above the mountains, the ordinary Tuesday morning of a city going about its business. 12 miles to the southeast at Fort Carson, Sergeant Briggs Holloway had been staring at a computer screen for 3 minutes. He had received a call from Colonel Cross's office 4 minutes ago and had been running the name for 3 of those 4 minutes, and what he found had produced in him the specific quality of stillness that comes when information arrives that exceeds the available emotional category for it. The file for Ash Mercer existed. It was in the system the way all service records were in the system, as a collection of fields and dates and designations. Most of the fields were standard. Branch rank, progression, service dates. The medical separation notation at age 24. And then there were the fields that were not standard. Fields where the tent had been replaced with a classification code that Holloway had encountered exactly twice in 12 years of administrative work at Fort Carson. A code that indicated materials so operationally sensitive that access required a clearance level above his own, a written request, and a 48-hour processing window that no one with a legitimate operational need had ever actually had time to use. 80% of the file was behind that code. What remained outside it, a series of dates, a series of locations, and at the end, 3 items. Special Operations Command, Operation Nightfall, Congressional Medal of Honor. Awarded October 2022, age of recipient at time of qualifying actions 22. Holloway read it again. Then he stood up because sitting down did not seem like an adequate physical response to what he had just read, and walked to the doorway of Colonel Cross's inner office. Cross was already putting on his jacket. "Sir," Holloway said. "I've seen it," Cross said without looking up. "The age, sir, at time of—" "I know." Cross buttoned the jacket with the precise economical movement of a man who has made a decision and is executing it. He moved to the small mirror into his closet door and straightened his collar with 2 fingers. His reflection was the reflection of a man in his late 50s who had not slept particularly well in some years and did not expect to sleep particularly well in the years remaining, and who had long ago made peace with the terms of that arrangement. "Get me 4 from the honor detail. Dress blues. Now." "The vehicle, sir." "Command vehicle." Cross picked up his cover and placed it on his head with the automatic precision of a motion performed 10,000 times. "And Holloway." "Sir." Cross looked at him in the mirror. "My son was in that compound and," he said, "he came home. She's why." Holloway stood very still for a moment. "Go," Cross said quietly. Holloway went. Back at the range, the bullet trap access door had not yet been opened. Prescott had found the key and was working the lock, which was stiff from disuse, the kind of mechanism that existed for maintenance purposes and was rarely called upon in practice. The small crowd from behind the shooting lanes had followed into the lobby area and spilled partially back into the range itself, a loose gathering of people held in place by the magnetic pull of something unresolved. Brandon Fitch stood among them with his camera at his side lens cap still off. He had found 3 things on his phone in the last 10 minutes. The first was a brief, heavily redacted entry on a government transparency database referencing an engagement in Kandahar province on August 14, 2021. The entry was 3 lines long. The outcome was listed as 14 personnel recovered. The circumstances were classified. The name of the individual responsible had been redacted. The second was a forum post 2 years old on a veterans discussion board. A user had asked if anyone had information about a confirmed solo engagement in Kandahar on that date. The responses ranged from silence to brief, careful statements from people who clearly knew something and had decided that what they knew was not theirs to share. The post had been viewed 11,000 times. The third was a small photograph in a regional Colorado newspaper, taken at a ceremony at Fort Carson in October 2022. The image was slightly out of focus, taken from across a large room with a phone camera. A young woman stood at a podium in dress uniform, her face partially turned away from the lens. On her collar, the insignia of a chief warrant officer. The article gave almost no details about the recipient or the nature of the honor. The woman in the photograph was 23 years old. She looked exactly like the woman standing near the lobby door. Brandon Fitch set his phone face down in his jacket pocket and stood very still for a moment. The flashback did not announce itself. It never did. One moment, Ash was standing near the lobby door of Top Shot Indoor Range, watching Prescott work the access lock, and the next moment, the fluorescent light above her head became a different kind of light entirely. The flat white light of noon in August. The kind of light that had weight in it, physical weight, the weight of a sky that had been hot since before dawn and would stay hot until long after dark. She was on the roof. The surface under her was concrete, rough, and sun-baked, radiating heat upward through her clothing, with the dumb, indifferent persistence of something that did not know or care what it was doing to the person lying on it. The steel fragment in her right leg had been speaking to her for 6 days. She had stopped listening to it the way you stop listening to a sound you cannot turn off and cannot afford to acknowledge. The compound was 240 meters north. She knew exactly how far, because she had paced it out in her mind 3 times before she climbed up here using a map that existed only in memory, because she had not been able to bring the actual map, and because, At this distance, in this heat, the air moved in ways that required accounting for, and the accounting had to be done before the moment, not during it. 14 soldiers were in that compound. The radio on her belt was still making noise. She had stopped processing the words. The words were all versions of the same word, the word that operational communications used when it had run out of options and was waiting for someone at a higher level to find new ones. Impossible. Impossible extraction window. Impossible support arrival. Impossible. She had been taught to note that word and set it aside because the word was a description of a situation as seen from a distance, and she was not at a distance. She was here. She was on this particular roof with this particular rifle and these particular problems in front of her, and problems in front of you were different from problems on a map. Problems in front of you had solutions that the map could not show. She breathed out. The first shot broke the silence the way the first shot always broke the silence completely, and then the silence returned around it and the work continued. She did not count the shots. Counting was for afterward. Right now, there was only the next problem. In its solution, each one following the last, with the clean coherence of logic working forward, each step true because the previous step was true. The heat pressed down. The legs spoke. She did not hear it. When it was over, the radio changed. The words in it changed. She registered this as information and filed it. She lay on the concrete in the diminishing afternoon light and let the body begin its inventory of what the last 2 hours had cost it, and she breathed slowly and listened to the inventory without judgment, the way you listen to a report from someone you trust, acknowledging each item and moving to the next. Later on the ground, with the late afternoon coming in, orange and flat, over the compound walls, Colonel Harlan Webb had put his hand on her shoulder. He was a man whose face no longer registered most things easily, but something was different in it in that moment. He reached into his jacket pocket and brought out a small brass plate. It was already engraved. He had carried it in that pocket since the morning, which meant he had believed before she went up to the roof that she would come back down. He pressed it into her palm. The metal was warm from his body. "Broken things still cut Mercer," he said. "Don't you forget that." She had wanted to tell him that she already knew, that she had known it before he said it, but there was not time, and in any case, some things land differently when they are spoken by someone who has earned the standing to speak them. He was killed 3 weeks later. The lobby of Top Shot came back around her. Fluorescent light, the smell of carpet and gun oil. Prescott was still working the lock. Holt was standing nearby with his clipboard waiting. She blinked once. She was still standing. She was always still standing. The lock gave. Prescott pulled the access door open. Inside the bullet trap was a large steel collection bin filled to depth with compacted sand and the flattened remnants of years of accumulated shooting sessions. The surface was uneven from decades of ballistic impact, gray and heavy and ordinary. Except for one place. In the center of the bin, at the precise point that corresponded to the line of fire from lane 14, there was a formation that did not belong with the rest of the contents. 8 bullets. They were stacked in a vertical column, each one sitting directly on top of the previous one, each one mushroomed and flattened in the characteristic disc shape of a rifle round on impact. The column was approximately 2 inches tall. The heat generated by 8 sequential rounds striking the same point in rapid succession had partially fused the lead where the edges of adjacent bullets touched, binding the stack into a single grotesque and exact structure. Above the trap in the concrete back wall, one hole, the diameter of a rifle round, perfectly centered. The 8 rounds had passed through the same point in space one after another, with a precision that should not have been achievable by any human shooter under any conditions, let alone under the conditions of the last 40 minutes. Nobody said anything. The crowd had pressed forward to see into the trap and had gone completely silent at what they found there. Holt was looking at the column of fused bullets with an expression from which all the certainty had drained, leaving something behind that was not yet understanding, but was the necessary precondition for it. Prescott stood with one hand on the open access door and looked from the bullet trap to lane 14 and back, as though checking the geometry of the room, confirming that the line from one to the other was what he thought it was. Colt Radner stepped forward. He had a small folding ruler from the equipment room, and he extended it and held it at the angle of fire from lane 14, tracing the line from the firing position back through the range past the target frame position to the bullet trap. He did this slowly and without comment, with the patient, methodical movement of someone performing a demonstration rather than a discovery showing others something he has already understood. When he finished, he lowered the ruler. From that firing position, and he said to no one in particular and to everyone present, hitting that exact point requires accounting in real time and without instruments for the HV airflow in this room, which runs at approximately 200 cubic feet per minute from the vents above lane 12. For the thermal gradient between the heated floor surface and the cooler ceiling, which is running about 4 degrees differential this morning. And for the low-frequency vibration from the compressor unit behind the north wall. He paused. All of that has to be done in your head in the moment while someone is standing next to you telling you that you are a safety risk. He set the ruler down. The exterior doors of the range opened. Not the lobby doors. The exterior doors, the ones that faced the parking lot directly, that were kept locked during operating hours and required a key code from outside. They opened because the code had been provided to the four-man detail by the range's security contractor 12 minutes earlier following a call from Fort Carson's administrative office. The sound of the doors was specific. The controlled certain sound of something opening that was usually closed, and with it a column of outdoor air, cold and direct, different in quality from the recirculated air that everyone in the building had been breathing for the last hour. Then footsteps, synchronized without being theatrical about it. The natural cadence of people for whom coordinated movement is so deeply habitual, it happens without intention. Colonel Raymond Cross came through the doors first. His dress blues were immaculate in the way that only sustained discipline produces not the immaculate of something new, but the immaculate of something maintained across years, every element of the uniform in its correct relationship to every other element. The ribbons aligned, the insignia centered the posture, carrying the quiet authority of someone for whom the uniform and the man inside it had over a long career become a single thing. Behind him, 4 members of the honor detail moved in formation and stopped when he stopped, creating a stillness at the entrance that was distinct from the stillness of the room. The room had been stunned into silence. The detail was simply present. Those were not the same. Cross did not look at Holt. He did not look at the bullet trap. He did not look at the crowd, which had gone so completely quiet that the ventilation system's low hum was audible again, persistent and unremarked as it had been all morning. He looked at lane 14. He found her without difficulty. He had known what he was looking for, and she was exactly where Colt had said she would be. The woman in the gray hoodie near the back of the lane, her right foot carrying its slight delay relative to her left, her arms at her sides, her face carrying the particular quality of calm that comes not from the absence of difficulty, but from having passed through enough of it that it no longer reorganizes you. Cross crossed the range floor. His boots on the concrete were precise and unhurried. The heel strike of each step was the metronomic sound of someone for whom the distance between where he was and where he was going is not an obstacle, but a straightforward fact. He passed Derek Holt without acknowledgement. He passed the crowd without hesitation. He walked past the brass plate on the equipment shelf in lane 14, and he did not look at it because what was on it was not his. He stopped 2 feet in front of Ash Mercer. He raised his hand to his brow. It was not the reflexive administrative salute of protocol and record-keeping. It was not the salute of an officer acknowledging a subordinate. It was the deliberate held salute of one person communicating to another person, something that exceeds the capacity of spoken language. The salute that means, I know what you did, and I know what it costs, and someone I love is alive because of it, and there is not a word in any register of English or any other language that covers the full weight of that. He held it for 3 full seconds. Ash looked at him, the pale, still eyes. The slight tightening at the corners, that was not quite emotion and not quite the absence of it. She returned the gesture with something quieter and more final than the formality of a salute. The acknowledgement of one person who has been through something to another person who partially understands what that thing was and is here because of it. Cross lowered his hand. He turned to face the room. My name is Colonel Raymond Cross, United States Army, Fort Carson. His voice was not loud. It was simply not possible to ignore. I apologize for the interruption. He did not perform apology. He performed precision. I want to explain why I'm here. The room was as still as it had been at any point in the morning. The woman you have spent the last hour questioning is Chief Warrant Officer Ash Mercer, retired. She is 25 years old. In August of 2021, at the age of 22, she carried out a solo engagement in Kandahar Province, Afghanistan, under conditions that 4 separate range analysts subsequently described as beyond the expected parameters of human marksmanship capability. The official citation remains classified at a level that I myself do not have full access to. He paused for the exact right length of time. 14 soldiers came home from that engagement. One of them is my son. He let that sit in the room. He looked at the column of fused bullets in the trap. What you are looking at is not a safety incident. It is not a malfunction. It is not the result of a shooter who does not know what she is doing. He looked at it for a moment longer with the expression of someone who has been given a gift they did not expect and will not forget. It is what happens when someone with her ability and her training chooses restraint instead of demonstration. She was not shooting at your target. She was telling you something about the difference between what you see and what is actually there. You did not have the context to understand it. He turned his gaze to Holt. That is not entirely your fault, but the part of it that is your fault I expect you to sit with. Holt was looking at the floor. His clipboard was at his side. The incident form was still on, it completed in the careful handwriting of a young man who had been entirely certain about what he was doing. Brandon Fitch had not raised his camera. He was standing in the crowd with his arms at his sides and the camera hanging from one hand with the lens cap still off, and on his face was the expression of someone experiencing a recalibration so thorough and complete that it has temporarily suspended his normal relationship with his surroundings. Cross turned back to Ash. His voice dropped from the register of address to the register of conversation, and the shift was itself a form of respect, the deliberate lowering of the formal register in favor of the personal one. On behalf of the United States Army, he said, and on a personal basis that I hope you will permit me, I want to say that what you did on that rooftop has not been forgotten. It will not be forgotten. He stopped. Something moved behind his eyes, brief and controlled the surface disturbance of something much larger passing through. My son has a daughter now. She is 2 years old. She does not know your name. Another pause. She exists because you were on that rooftop. The range was silent in a way that ranges are not usually silent. Ash looked at Cross for a long moment. Then she crossed to the equipment shelf in lane 14, picked up the M21, and cradled it with the easy familiarity of something restored to where it belonged. She walked to where Holt was standing. He heard her approach and looked up. He found in her face the one thing he had not been prepared to find. Not anger, not satisfaction, not the cool vindication of someone who has been proven right in front of witnesses. She looked at him the way a person looks at someone they have already decided not to hold accountable for what they did not know. You were doing your job, she said. You saw something that looked wrong, and you acted on it. That's what you're supposed to do. She held his gaze steadily. The information you had was incomplete. That's not the same as being wrong on purpose. Holt said nothing. His jaw worked once. He was 28 years old and he had been certain about things his entire adult life. Certain in the way that comes from never having been wrong about anything that mattered. And the floor had shifted under him today in a way he could feel in his chest but could not yet fully map. Next time, Ash said, ask more questions before you draw your conclusion. That's the only difference between what you did today and what you should have done. She said it without cruelty. She said it the way someone places a tool in the hands of a person who needs it and steps back. Holt nodded once. It was a small nod not performed for the crowd behind him, not produced by obligation. It was the nod of someone who has actually received something. Prescott stepped forward. He had the manner of a man who has watched his business become the location for something that greatly exceeded his managerial experience and who is grateful to have been handed a clear path forward. Mr. Prescott, Cross said before Prescott could speak. Prescott looked at him. My office will be in contact tomorrow regarding a formal Veterans Awareness partnership with this facility. Nothing punitive, constructive. Cross glanced at Holt briefly, a glance of perhaps 1 second. I'd suggest any internal personnel matters be proportionate. Prescott nodded with the vigorous certainty of a man who is grateful to have been given a concrete next step. Colt Ranner had been standing at lane 7 through the second half of all of this. He had watched Cross arrive and watched the room reorganize itself around the fact of his presence the way a landscape reorganizes around a change in weather. He had watched Ash retrieve her rifle. He had watched Holt receive what Ash gave him and understood from the small, specific nod that it had actually landed. He looked at Ash now. She caught him looking. He said quietly enough that only she heard it. He would have known. Whatever he told you on that rooftop, he would have known it was true before he said it. Ash was quiet for a moment. She looked at the brass plate on the stock of the M21 in her hands, the small engraved surface with its 2 pieces of information coordinates and a date. Then she said, he did know. That's why he said it. The motif landed for the 3rd time without ceremony, without the story pausing to acknowledge its own symmetry. It was just 2 people in a shooting range in Colorado, and a sentence that had been true before it was ever spoken on a rooftop 3 years ago and had stayed true through everything that had come after. Broken things still cut. Brandon Fitch left before most of the others. He walked out to the parking lot and sat in his truck for several minutes without starting it. He was thinking about 40 minutes of footage. He was thinking about what posting it would have looked like and what it would have done, and the difference between the version of the morning where he made one choice and the version where he made the other. He drove home and spent 4 hours making a different video. Not the one he had planned. Less than 3 minutes. No performance, no angle, no branded content. Just a man sitting in front of a camera saying that he had been at a range that morning and had almost made a serious mistake, and explaining what the mistake would have been and why it had almost happened and what he thought that meant about the gap between what we see and what is actually there. He posted it at 2 in the afternoon. The title was 3 words, I was wrong. The video received 4 million views in 36 hours and was shared by 14 veteran organizations without coordination independently, because the people running those organizations all had the same reaction when they watched it. He did not mention Ash Mercer's name. He had not been asked to protect it. He simply understood without being told that her name was not his to offer. Derek Holt was reassigned within the week. Prescott handled it with the proportionality that Cross had suggested, which turned out to mean a transfer to a training and orientation role working with new members on range basics and equipment handling. It was not technically a demotion. Whether it became something more than a consequence depended entirely on what Derek Holt did with the opportunity embedded inside it. He spent the first 2 weeks being quietly and genuinely useful to people who needed the help. It felt different from what he had been doing before, less like authority and more like service. He was not yet sure whether he preferred the feeling, but he was paying attention in a way he had not paid attention before, asking more questions, before drawing conclusions, holding his certainty a beat longer, before acting on it, checking the gap between what he saw and what was actually there. That was something. It was, in fact, the beginning of something. The range instituted a new orientation process for all staff 3 weeks after the Tuesday in question. Its opening segment was a 20-minute module developed with input from Cross's office, covering the broad and often invisible range of backgrounds that came through civilian range doors, the gap between what a person looked like and what that person had done, the practical difference between a safety concern and an incomplete assessment. The module did not use Ash Mercer's name. It used a single word repeated at intervals throughout its 20 minutes as both a question and an instruction. Consider. Consider what you do not know about the person standing in front of you. Consider what they may have done that will never be announced. Consider the distance between what you can see and what is there. Ash came back on a Tuesday. She arrived at 7:14, the same time as always, parked in the same spot near the far end of the lot, walked across the frozen asphalt with her rifle case in her right hand, the slight catch in her stride unchanged the cold Colorado morning, going about its business around her without comment. Holt was at the front desk when the door opened. He had volunteered for the early shift to cover a staffing shortage, and when he looked up and saw her, the thing that crossed his face was not guilt, which would have been about him, and not performance, which would have been worse. It was something simpler and more durable than either of those things. The quiet respect of a person who has been shown something real and has not forgotten it. He straightened up. "Good morning," he said. Ash looked at him, the pale, steady eyes. No residue of 3 weeks ago, no case being made, no verdict being maintained. She was not carrying the morning in question around with her because she did not carry things she had already set down. "Morning," she said. She placed her membership card on the counter. He scanned it and handed it back and said nothing further because he understood now when not to speak, and that understanding was its own small form of growth. She walked through the inner door, lane 14. She set the rifle case on the bench, unzipped it with the sound the zipper had always made, a low, familiar sound that meant the morning was beginning. She lifted the M21 out and felt its weight settle into her hands. The walnut stock warm from the truck's cab, the brass plate at the right temperature. She ran her thumb across it once. Coordinates, a date, 2 pieces of information that would mean nothing to almost everyone who would ever read them, and would mean everything to the small number of people who knew what had happened at those coordinates on that date. That asymmetry had never bothered her. It was, in fact, part of what made the plate worth carrying. The value of a thing did not require that its value be legible to everyone who passed it. She put her ear protection in. She raised the rifle. She found the wire. The thin horizontal wire at the top of the target frame. The specific point on it where 8 rounds had struck and where this morning the 9th would go. Not because she was trying to prove anything to anyone, not because she was maintaining something for the record, because this was the practice and the practice was the point, the weekly confirmation that what she had not diminished, that what the fragment in her leg and the document in her glove compartment and the years had taken from her in one register they had not taken in another. She breathed out. Outside, the Colorado morning was flat and cold and going about its ordinary business. The mountains to the west had new snow on them from the previous night. Traffic moved on Highway 83. People were driving to jobs they would return home from, living inside the ordinary forward motion of ordinary days, which was its own kind of extraordinary when you had stood in enough places that showed you what it looked like when ordinary days ended. 14 families were having breakfast somewhere. Fathers, brothers, husbands, who had come home from a place they were not supposed to talk about, who had gone on to have the years that follow years, the accumulation of ordinary life that is the whole point of coming home. Some of them had children. Some of those children were old enough to ask questions about the world, to pull at sleeves and point at things and want to understand what they were looking at. None of them knew her name. None of them knew about the rooftop or the fragment of steel or the brass plate or the man who had pressed it into her hands and told her something he had believed since before he said it. They did not need to know. It had never been about being known. The shot broke clean. The wire trembled. The paper target hung at 50 yards unmarked and pristine, exactly as it was supposed to be. She worked the action. She found the point again. She breathed out again. And in the steel trap behind the concrete wall, in the dark, in the sand, in the accumulated evidence of years of ordinary Tuesday mornings, the 10th round found the stack in the column grew, and no one watching from outside the lane would ever have known that anything had happened at all. That was the point. That had always been the point. Getting there. 14 soldiers returned home on August 14th, 2021. Their names remain classified. She never told anyone.